I'm here with Jonathan Levin, the co-founder and CSO of Chainalysis. We're here at the Royal Tulip Hotel in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. Jonathan's been in Brazil here for about a week now. He came to the AB Crypto conference here in Brasilia, and you were also in São Paulo earlier doing some meetings. But Jonathan, great to have you on the show. Welcome here.
Thanks for having me, Aaron.
Great. So to get started, why don't you just tell us a bit about yourself and what is Chainalysis?
I'm, the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Chainalysis. I'm also a recovering economist. I've been spending a bunch of time with central bank folks here in Brasilia, and it's a good reminder that I did actually start out in crypto as an economist, and been having a lot more of those conversations. But I really started off in cryptocurrency about 11 years ago, doing economic research into the incentives that secure Bitcoin, and realized at that point that actually there needed to be a company that knows how and why people are actually using cryptocurrencies. At the time, it was just Bitcoin, really. But we decided that there needs to be a company that can actually take all of this public and open data and actually make it understandable for the general population and for all the businesses and governments that needed to understand what was actually happening in cryptocurrencies. And so that was really the genesis of why I sort of got interested in what we do at Chainalysis. And I met Michael and Jan, my two co-founders at Chainalysis, who are two Danish guys who were actually doing different projects. Michael was a co-founder at Kraken. Jan had built the sort of original and first Android Bitcoin wallet called Bitcoin Spinner. And so we actually have the three of us came at with different angles, but ultimately all of us said that there needs to be this company that knows the most about how and why people use crypto. And we really found that we could actually package up that information and give it to all the relevant stakeholders. And sort of what we've seen over time at Chainalysis is that it's been sort of the different parts of the industry that have used us for different reasons. And so we have a public sector business, which is really great at knowing how we can actually prevent criminal activity and supervise the market. And then there's also been our private sector business, which is about how businesses can prevent money laundering on their platforms and essentially deal with the risk associated with that.
Got it. And in this kind of emergent field of blockchain analytics, if that's how you want to define what you guys are doing, there's kind of a whole swarm of these types of companies out there now. But I think you guys were really sort of the pioneers who, kind of the first and arguably like the gold standard for these types of companies in this kind of subsector of crypto. Maybe just talk a bit about what maybe kind of differentiates Chainalysis from some of the other competitors or the other companies operating in this.
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple of different things that matter. Ultimately we are a data company, so we think about ourselves as making sure that we take all of this publicly available information, which allows there to be everyone can look at the blockchain, but who has the most context about how and why people are actually using this technology. And so it comes back to do you have proprietary data collection strategies that are better or more comprehensive than the other companies in the space. And so we have over 750 private sector companies that use us for some form of anti-money laundering transaction monitoring. And so all of that information feeds into our database about what's happening. We've been at this longer than anyone else in the space today. So we have that deeper history of what was happening at that time. And that's actually particularly important in cryptocurrencies because actually the one thing the blockchain does really perfectly and better than any other system is that it perfectly preserves all the transaction histories for all time. And so, what I often say is that, there will be a law enforcement case or a scam or something happens in, where in 20 years time, someone is, caught because of a mistake they made, and it's there lying in our data from 6 years ago. And like that means that you had to be there 6 years ago, really capturing that information in order to have sort of the best information about knowing what's going on today in crypto. So really the data aspect is something that differentiates us from a lot of the competition, but also the breadth of our platform now is a lot broader than any of the competition. We're significantly larger, well, more capitalized, but in terms of like the product offerings that we have, they stretch from being sort of more on the raw data side. So we acquired a company last week called Transpose, which allows any builder to just like access raw blockchain data, but all the way to like our real-time APIs on our compliance stack, and our workflow products that actually talk between sort of the different entities that use our products. So like the solution set that we've now developed, and we've now also launched into sort of business intelligence and for exchange customers with a product called Playbook. And so the breadth of the solutions and ways to access our unique insights has actually become a lot broader than anyone in the sort of like blockchain analysis field, which I feel is sort of really the investigation and compliance suite. We're actually a much now broader platform than that.
Yeah, and I think as a journalist, anytime there's like a new Chainalysis sort of research report that drops on anything, it's always kind of like, okay, I got to stop and stop what I'm doing and like see what this is all about, right? Because there's always some kind of new unique insight, or whether it's the geography of cryptocurrency report that you guys put out every year, which is it's kind of the gold standard in the industry of like who's doing what where in this industry. It's I mean, I haven't been able to find a better source. I mean, it's not a perfect source, but there's nothing better out there at this point, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the gold standard as far as trying to map out just how robust this industry is worldwide and where kind of the hot spots are, et cetera. I guess on that note, Brazil came in 7th on your most recent report.
Yeah.
And you're obviously here right now doing some business development, meeting some people. Why don't you tell us a bit about A, like why you're here, and B, maybe who you've been talking to, what those meetings have been, what's been particularly interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so we look at our cryptocurrency adoption index for the world, and look at like what markets are the most interesting. So we sort of eat our own dog food, if you will. Like I also am excited of when it comes out, and we look at like, do we have the right strategy for the different countries where we think cryptocurrency adoption is biggest? And so Brazil coming in 7th globally means that it's something that something to pay attention to. I've been in São Paulo and now in Brasilia, sort of the financial capital of Brazil, and the obviously the government center of Brazil, and both are very interesting dynamics of where we're at. I've been super impressed with the way that the dialogue is occurring between the government and the industry. I've been to multiple events where really government employees and industry are speaking sort of the same language about describing what is happening in upcoming regulation and sort of what those considerations are, and it's great to see that. Sao Paulo was great to see. I saw everyone from sort of smaller startup entrepreneurs building sort of local tax solutions, and I also saw the credits team who are building like sort of innovative credit products on blockchains for foreign investors to get exposure into Brazil. I saw really a range of different companies that are serving the market, as well as sort of the larger banks. And so I spent time with some of the leading banks in the space, and impressive to see how some of them have launched a stable coin, and some of them have been looking at custody more seriously. And really sort of the conversation that everyone is having is that it's clear that this is a fertile market for everyone to participate in, and everyone is sort of eagerly waiting for the latest sort of regulatory guidance to drop, which the deadline is this month. So
Yeah, and I think it's the one thing that's sort of it's impossible to not notice about Brazil is just kind of how fervent the financial innovation ecosystem is. Just with you've probably heard about Pix and things like, and you can buy a coconut from a guy on the side of the road just by like scanning a QR code on your phone. It's things like this that just you don't really see in other places, right? And this has kind of been held up as the model for an instant payment solution, kind of open source, interoperable instant payment solution that a lot of other central banks are looking to copy now globally. And my sort of thesis is that I think that is also going to happen with the digital real. I think there's going to be a lot of folks trying to sort of imitate what they've developed here because I mean, it's still in development, right? But I think they've got kind of the right model that this is something that could work in practice, right? And they've proven that they can deliver on this previously, right? It's not just the guys in the ivory tower, coming up with ideas. These things they actually have a track record of delivering on this stuff. So that's super interesting, and they've the banks have all and the fintechs here have all really kind of been quite advanced in terms of just thinking innovatively about the technology, about digital assets, incorporating these things, offering these things to their clients in a way that I think is it's quite a bit different than the U.S. at least in terms of just the maturation of this, moving these things into actual production. I'd like to ask a bit more about like what have been kind of the most intriguing like kind of questions that people have had for you, like when you're meeting with folks at the central bank or private sector folks or startups, like what are the questions that people have had for you, and as far as what type of value can you bring to them?
I think that one of the interesting things that is constantly occurring in the conversation is how do we compare to the rest of the world? How do we compare to the rest of the world? How do we compare to other countries in Latin America? And there's definitely a whole benchmarking sort of exercise that people are doing. And Chainalysis, we have people on the ground in 32 countries around the world. I spend my time on a plane going to those countries, making sure that like I understand what's happening, and the observations that we have based on sort of the trends that we see on the adoption of technology is something that the big banks are definitely curious about as they get more mature. They want to know, how are people dealing with, stable coins in, that have, broader circulation? How are people dealing with, like, can you help with analyzing sort of the risks that come with that? And can you help with, more real-time access to information to make decisions? And how are you thinking about sort of rule sets of different risk models for Brazil in particular than anywhere else? I think the other thing that people, more interestingly in Brazil have spoken to me about is that there have been some relatively high-profile investment scams here in Brazil, and that really harms the credibility of the industry. And I think that making sure that there's capacity on the government side to deal with that, as well as sort of the private sector having the tools in place to help the government, have been like a theme that I've seen from some of my conversations, particularly on the industry level. That seems to be like a blocking factor of getting more adoption.
Yeah, this might be a great subject actually for a Chainalysis kind of content research deep dive into some of these financial pyramid schemes that we've had here. They're kind of like larger than life stories in a lot of ways. But yeah, that's definitely been an issue here, is sort of unearthing these things, and I mean, when these things blow up, it's like they obviously have pretty big repercussions, and it's a lot of negative headlines, and it hurts a lot of retail investors, unfortunately, which is obviously a setback for the industry. We'd like to get your thoughts on coming back to kind of the regulatory component here. As you mentioned, Brazil's we're in the process of getting regulation here. We've got a law that's been passed. Now we're in the process of trying to get kind of there's a few steps to getting an actual framework in place, but those steps are in motion right now. Maybe talk a bit about how, and maybe even bringing in your global vantage point here of how other countries have been wrestling with this. But now that we're in the point where we're a bit mature, we're kind of moving toward a regulatory framework. How can regulators kind of successfully use the tools that you guys are providing to help kind of build out a safe and sort of efficient regulatory regime for this industry?
Yeah. So we start with really sort of the policy side. So, when it comes to regulating the space, each geography is a little bit different. The use of cryptocurrency is a little bit different. For example, in Brazil, sort of the leading trading pair on most days is actually between a stablecoin and the Brazilian real, and so that's a very different sort of environment than some other geographies, if you will. And so, getting a macro picture of how cryptocurrency is being used in the geography is actually a very sort of significant step on the policy side to make sure that you're thinking about those considerations properly and like prioritizing the right actual sort of regulatory framework aspects that maybe are different for Brazil than they are for another country. And so we start with sort of helping shape what are the requirements around sort of global level data or like macro level data about the industry, the questions that the policy side of the regulators have in order to help with that. And we're doing a lot of work. We have a global policy team that does a ton of engagement around the world, getting those requirements per geography and understanding how our data can actually help with creating dashboards and other things that policy people in the regulators can actually do. Once then, we've seen in Brazil that there's a prioritization on making sure that the virtual asset service providers are regulated, that they have a licensing program. Then there's a couple of other steps that typically start to occur. There's the supervision aspects of the industry and the monitoring of the industry, which happen at that level where they want to be sort of the most advanced regulators are wanting to be proactive about that they see that there is a set of information that is out there that can help with supervision, can help with monitoring, and they have to be able to look at anomalies and look at sort of patterns that they need to understand, is the sector evolving differently? Have we missed some significant market players that should have been licensed that weren't licensed? And so, there's really a monitoring aspect of the market that we typically see regulators get involved in, all the way down to examinations and then ultimately enforcement, where on the examination front, we have regulators around the world that actually use us to look at the data of the licensees, like the VASPs and the exchanges, etc., and to be able to sort of take the reporting information that they receive in examinations. And for those listeners that don't know what examinations are, they're not high school examinations. They're sort of on-site examinations where regulators come in and want to understand sort of the controls around anti-money laundering and other types of regulatory requirements that people have. And they take data about what that customer is doing and making sure that there is like a way for the regulator to actually visualize that data and understand that data is something that our technology has been used for.
Sure.
And then ultimately, like on the enforcement side, investigating where money went, and particularly important for some of the complex cases that we saw. These sort of larger investment schemes that sort of collapse. Our technology gets used to be able to really break those apart and untangle where the money is gone and help hold those people to account.
Yeah, and it seems like anytime there's some sort of major investigation or something involving cryptocurrency, whether it's a government or whether it's trying to unearth the DAO hacker, right? It's they're always using Chainalysis data in some capacity, right? There's always kind of that trail of data that's being kind of, I guess, harvested and utilized, manipulated to sort of track the whereabouts and the movements of the funds and everything. Maybe a couple more questions here, but as far as obviously we are in Brazil here, we're in the point where we're at the beginning of creating a regulatory regime that will I think we have there's competent people in place to kind of to do this. There's a law in the books. What are some maybe practical advice you would give to kind of the regulators who are in charge of implementing this? I mean, what are some maybe lessons learned that you've witnessed in like other jurisdictions, or maybe just like things to avoid doing? Maybe that you've you've kind of encountered in other places that are maybe at the same maturity or maybe more mature than Brazil right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been super impressed with the technical competence of people that I've met at the regulators here. I mean, sometimes I go to a new, like a country that I haven't been to before, and the actual sort of like education level on the technology is just much more rudimentary than it is here in Brazil. Like in Brazil, the president of the central bank um, mined Bitcoin at some point. Like that's like a whole different like level of understanding about the technology than what you've seen in sort of other places, right? So the the know-how and the technology depth of understanding is definitely there in terms of like the people. The question becomes, can you prioritize the right sort of regulatory framework aspects? And what I mean by that is that in some aspects, you've got DeFi, you've got NFTs, you've got like lots of complexity that is possible to engage with. The trick is that starting with establishing a smaller regulatory perimeter on the most used and most impactful pieces of legislation to protect the average consumer is far more important than being comprehensive on the entire regulatory framework for the sector. If you look at Mika was very specific on what was excluded from the regulatory perimeter in version 1 versus trying to be the all-encompassing comprehensive framework. And it is comprehensive in the sense of like the main activities, but don't try and be sort of completely comprehensive to try and imagine what is it going to mean when AI bots have wallets associated with them. But I've been in policy meetings where suddenly that becomes like the fixation of like, well, we need to future-proof this to the point of like that aspect. So I think that's the first thing, is like make sure that the regulatory perimeter makes a lot of sense, and make sure that it's focused on protecting the consumers and investors that it should be protecting, and protecting our national security. So that's like the first point. The second point is that rules on the book are great. Rules on the book are only half of the battle. Like the next part is operationalizing and actually making sure that people are following rules on the book. And what that requires is both capacity planning on the staffing of the regulator and the sort of attitude that the regulator has towards the industry, right? So it's got to be constant engagement. If it's just, here's a set of rules, there's the web form, talk to us in a bit, that has a different sort of set of reaction from an industry to, actually what I see in Brazil today, which is there's constant dialogue. There's lots of, there's lots of shared language. There's lots of shared understanding of what is important for the Brazilian economy. And then there needs to be capacity on the regulator side to do the licensing properly, to do the examinations after licensing, and actually to do the monitoring and supervision. And so, those things are definitely sort of important aspects to get right. Is that those people need technology, as I sort of described, but we also need the people on the ground actually doing that work. I would say finally in Brazil, like one of the big challenges is that when it comes to sort of the egregious activity, when it comes to these investment scams, when it comes to sort of the bad actors and weeding them out of the industry, we need to, like, the government needs to partner across the industry, across government, to be able to do that, right? So the regulator needs to partner up with the federal police and potentially with also local police to be able to address those issues. And that takes time as well, because these are new bonds between teams. You might have like the cyber team in federal police now working with the financial regulator, and that hasn't really typically happened before. And so that's also an important aspect of getting it right.
Right. Yeah. So it's not just a set it and forget it type of play, right? There needs to be kind of, you need to keep watering the garden essentially. There needs to be resources. There needs to be staffing. These staff need to have kind of the adequate tools and the technology and the right relationships with the private sector to be able to really enforce all these rules properly with kind of that end goal of just kind of protecting the consumer or enforcing operationalizing whatever those priorities are, essentially. So I think that's kind of so it's easy to get caught up in like the big picture of like, oh, these are the things we need to do. We need to future-proof this against AI bots or whatever. But it's like, well, the immediate need is just like protect people from getting scammed, right? That's kind of the most, and protect against criminals and bad actors. And how do we go about just enabling that? And then we can worry about the future. Like, we'll worry about that when we get there, right? I always like the John Maynard Keynes quote where it's like in the long run we're all dead. So
let's focus on the here and now. Yeah, and I think that's honestly the biggest mistake that we see people making. The other sort of like maybe more nuanced thing that I think is sort of important, and I think that there is some understanding of this in Brazil, but it's still, I think, evolving a little bit from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, is that, look, there are reporting requirements in traditional financial markets that are important for the regulator to get visibility into those markets. I don't know the Brazilian financial market infrastructure that well, but you could think of like broker-dealers having certain reporting requirements to regulators here to be able to understand, to give them information about what's happening, and then that then leads to supervision. The same type of reporting there will be some reporting requirements that do exist for cryptocurrency related businesses here in Brazil, but shaping that in such a way that you don't create onerous burden on the industry and that you fully leverage the potential for the open and transparent nature of the blockchain is an important aspect of getting this regulatory regime right. I mean, we've seen in certain instances, geographies go too far on the type of reporting requirements that are required by virtual asset service providers, where that information itself can easily be accessed from the blockchain with the right technology. And so that's something that I think is an important aspect of getting like the nuance right inside of this, and it's maybe like a level deeper than.
Yeah, and this is something that crypto dad Chris Giancarlo has often talked about, right? Where it's if like the regulators have kind of the right sort of mindset and the right technology and the right purview into these systems, like a lot of the stuff that's manual and like paper based or whatever, Excel spreadsheets now, like you could actually automate that using tools like Chainalysis and by analyzing the data, right? And so really kind of taking that more kind of innovative approach, I guess, toward like rethinking what's our standard for these reporting requirements, right?
And the interesting thing about that is that the build to ingest manual reporting for a new industry is super difficult. Like actually, like the effort to analyze the publicly available blockchain data is often less technical effort than actually building a brand new system to allow for a new industry to report into, your financial intelligence unit. I mean, I've watched this happen where, the actual, the suspicious activity report filing system in the United States cost an enormous amount of money. Whereas like actually, being able to analyze publicly available blockchain information is a fraction of the cost.
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, for every one of these suspicious activity reports that gets filed, you need somebody examining it, and there's a whole there's just a ton of labor that goes into these things that could, in theory, be essentially automated or streamlined dramatically, right, based on some of these systems that you're building.
Yeah, I think there's that, and maybe just to belabor the point a little bit more, there's like an initial build side of that, which is an upfront cost for all of that. The other thing that actually we see geographies do is that they enrich some of the filings that they get from the virtual asset service providers with Chainalysis data to understand which should go for manual review and which should not, and how to tie maybe some of those different reportings together. The other thing that's nice about having an open and transparent ledger is that you actually don't have arbitrary reporting thresholds. So when it comes to sort of most financial reporting in traditional markets, and this could be for suspicious activity with suspicious activity reports, or in the US there's currency transaction reports as well. They have sort of thresholds where if this set of transactions is over $10,000, like you need to file this report. The nice thing about having an open database is that like you don't need to set an arbitrary threshold of $10,000. Like you should actually just pay attention to what matters, and
like where the funds are coming
from.
Where
the funds are coming from, and like it doesn't matter whether it's $500 or whether it's $9,999. Like you can actually look at that information in completeness rather than having a subset.
Right. I suppose it'd be easier to weed out people that might be trying to structure these things as well, where instead of I'm doing a bunch of transactions of $9,999 to not trigger the $10,000 threshold, but then I'm structuring these over a few days or something, and it's maybe not triggering, but you would need something, a solution like yours would presumably be able to like kind of catch that and be like, hey, look, there's something kind of fishy going on here. That's maybe worth a second look. Maybe just to kind of close out, I'd love to get your quick thoughts on just what's been happening in the U.S. lately with some of these enforcement actions. And obviously, you guys don't have a token, you don't broker, you're not brokerage, you don't facilitate trading of currencies or anything. But there's this broader theme that the industry has been, this narrative that the industry has really been propagating of like, we're going to leave the U.S. if we don't essentially get treated the way we want to be treated. And maybe that's an empty threat, maybe it's not. But you are seeing companies, exchanges, and service providers trying to geographically diversify a bit more now than maybe in the past, or there's a bit more urgency behind that. So I would just like to get your thoughts on just as a service provider, based in the U.S., but you're operating globally, or right, I assume you're based in the U.S.
Yeah.
But operating globally, how has maybe just the over the last 2 years or so with the U.S. situation, how has that kind of affected your push to sort of just geographically diversify?
Yeah, I mean, look, like just being very clear, we're not leaving the U.S. Like we're very much a company that believes that the U.S. is ultimately one of the most important markets for this technology, and I do believe that there will be a good future for crypto in the United States. I'm actually, on the medium long term, I'm not actually that worried about crypto being a significant part of the U.S. economy, and I'm actually bullish in that sense. I get to now think in sort of longer term horizons than an entrepreneur who's starting a business today, right? And that's part of us being able to take longer term views. In terms of like what we're witnessing in terms of the dynamics, I think that there's a couple of dynamics that are unfolding. Venture capital and builders are more willing to go outside of the United States today for investable opportunities and for business building in this sector than they have been previously. Like, I would say that like if you're starting a business today in Brazil, it is more likely that you could attract capital from the United States of America than it would have been 2 years ago. For the same idea, for the same quality of team, like I would say that like the environment in the United States has meant that like people are looking at investable opportunities more broadly than they were previously. In terms of like the global companies that have been looking at international expansion, look, I think there's a couple of things going on there. One is there are exciting markets outside of the US popping up. There are also ways where constructive rulemaking on the regulatory front is incredibly important for global standard setting. Mm-hmm. And if that conversation is not happening in the United States, that conversation has to happen outside of the United States to build models for the future frameworks that will ultimately be sort of like brought back into the United States. And so, I think that it is sort of great that we've got companies that are engaging in geographies like the UK, like France, like Singapore, like even in Israel, even in Brazil, right? To actually look at like how do you create models of how to oversee this market, because those become real sort of stakes in the ground of how the regulation actually does progress globally. Like it's not just whatever the United States says becomes the regulatory framework for the world. Like if there are serious countries that are actually building these frameworks, they become like very much models that global countries then look at. And so when you see companies sort of saying that they are, leaving the United States or thinking about it or expanding more aggressively internationally, to me it's like there is a real opportunity that lies beyond the boundaries of the United States, but also there is potential to build these regulatory models that actually become more like global standards than just sitting and waiting for Congress to act in America, which is not a strategy that people can afford to play.
Yeah, so it's basically kind of a twofold play here, where you can look abroad for just new market opportunities, but then also there's going to be these conversations on the regulatory kind of framework front that, for better or worse, may not be happening in the U.S. right now, but you can participate in these conversations elsewhere with the hopes of basically re-importing them back into the U.S. eventually when things maybe kind of settle down a little bit. So maybe just wrap up question here, but what's been your favorite part about Brazil so far? Any favorite foods that you've enjoyed?
Yeah. Well, I actually went to Mita Festival in São Paulo, which is a music festival downtown. Where,
oh wow.
Got to see a bunch of bands playing like right in the middle of downtown São Paulo, which is probably not an area that I would normally go to if there wasn't like a fence around all of the place that we were in. But I got to see some great bands play and also see like some of the architecture of like the old Sao Paulo and see some of the changes that we're seeing. I saw there was a huge office block that was converted into actual residential housing, like right in the middle of downtown, and I saw all the lights on inside the office building, well now flat building, like watching the concerts in open air, which was fun. And I think that the exciting part is that it's very easy to do business here. It's very people are extremely helpful and friendly, and people have been constantly sort of welcoming us here to help stitch together the private sector and the public sector. And people have seen the value of Chainalysis even before we have physical presence here. And now that we have we've got 5 people and growing in Brazil, in the different cities, we're seeing brand recognition of Chainalysis, which is awesome to see. And people understand already like the value that we can have in bridging the gap between the private sector and the government, which has been awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, if on that note, if folks want to engage with you or the Chainalysis LatAm team, what's the best channel for that?
Yeah. So we have different people in the different cities. So we've got Brianna in Rio and Bruno in Brasilia and Hugo and a couple of other, and Johnny Campos in Sao Paulo. So like we've got like a bunch of people in the different cities, so you can look them up. But the best way is honestly to get in touch with us on social media, send us an email. On the Chainalysis website, if you've got something that you're like particularly interested in, you can check out our Twitter. We're going to do a lot more stuff, we'd love to go to meetups and participate in what people have. And I'm looking forward to come back to Brazil as well. So
amazing. Well, Jonathan Levin, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.